Hey out there, this is Thursday, January 30th, 2020. And it is just about exactly 8:20 in the morning here in Northern California. And I'll be discussing several things as usual. Mainly, what I try to do is explain to people the dynamics of politics and economics and how that affects us on a psycho-spiritual level, social psycho-spiritual level as human beings. And explain about these controllers, these tyrants. I like to try to empower people with accurate information to edify on terms that God puts forth in Scripture. And I'm kind of fundamental in that sense that, I want to be able to tell people, listen, don't listen to me. If anything I say doesn't jive with Scripture, always lean towards Scripture, okay? But the stuff I talk about is very relevant and it's very imperative information. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother. But it's stuff that I'm not hearing anybody else talk about. I listen to tons of pundits out there, commentators, whatnot. And, none of them talk like me, okay? They don't explain in a succinct, clear, logical, concise terms the stuff I'm explaining to people. First of all, you've got to understand that if you don't feel 100% right, if you're somewhat frustrated, if you're kind of annoyed at the system, understand there's a good underlying reason for that. It's because you're being tyrannized. So first of all, I need to convince people that indeed you're being tyrannized. And I don't care what economic classification you fall under, okay? We're all in this same boat together. You understand? We are literally one family. Because the paradigm we need to adopt and embrace, okay, wrap our minds around and believe in and trust in as our only viable reality is the one God puts forth, okay? So everything I talk about should be understood as logical and basic. The kind of stuff even a little child can understand. I try to make it that simple for people to understand. But indeed, we're being tyrannized, okay? It's a rigged game. You see, this thing they call capitalism is not at all capitalism. Okay, first of all, if you're interested in knowing what capitalism is, you can get a brief definition, just Google the term, right? And you can say, okay, well, basically I understand capitalism. It has to do with capital and how you spend it. And, really it's just very basic, topical kind of stuff you're going to get with the definition. If you really want to understand economics and capitalism and things like socialism, you need to study, you need to research it, you need to go to the people that devoted their lives to researching and studying these things. Guys like Adam Smith. Now, he was, of course, living, it was over 200 years ago now, but it was the dawn of the industrial age. Okay, and he saw big changes in store. And, of course, he couldn't predict the future. He didn't try to. But he was pointing out certain trends, certain paradigms, patterns that, that the capitalists, so-called capitalists, were engaging in. He talks about the cheating. He talks about how things get topsy-turvy. And he talked about what is every nation's single greatest asset, which is clearly labor. So fundamentally, if you understand that the workers are every nation's single greatest asset, it helps you to understand the history of slavery. Okay, and these are tyrants. We can all agree that it's tyrants that run a slave system, right? We know that's not capitalism. Okay, that's not a game that's being played in any way fair. It's not, they don't even try to be fair. It's not even hidden. It's straight up in your face. I'm taking you, I'm subjugating you, okay, and I'm trying to instill this belief that it's okay to own another human being and force them to do whatever I tell them to do. And there'll be ramifications. I mean, you could beat your slave, you do whatever you want. You make their lives absolutely miserable if they don't comply to your every whim and what they do, how they live their lives. But, there's one thing you got to understand about slaves. is that you had to take care of your slave. If you expected them to perform, you had to provide certain basic essential human needs, of course. I mean, anybody could figure that out. You had to provide them with shelter. So right away, a slave got housing, automatic. You had to have housing, some sort, even if it was rudimentary, a shack, right? Like they used to call these things, which is a derogatory term now. I know they don't use it, but wetback shacks. We've all heard that. So these farmers up and down the California coast, of course, they had tons of these. You still see them today. You could drive Highway 1, the coastal scenic route there, and you'll still see remnants of these type of shacks. They were living quarters, though. Stuff that make the homeless in America today, it makes their mouths drool when they see that sort of thing, because I'd kiss the ground you walked on if you provided me that today. Do you understand? Where we're at in America in the 21st century is reached absurdist levels. It's the kind of stuff, that's why I say, people, our forefathers would roll around in their graves. No, my friends, they wouldn't roll around in their graves. No, they wouldn't even just want to kick us in the teeth. Do you understand? They'd want to put a bullet through most of our heads. Do you understand? Because we've all acted very remiss. And you've become complicit in this whole rigged game. That's called capitalism. It isn't. It's anything but capitalism. Okay, capitalism indicates, well, it's a game that's going to at least be played fair. And if you look at the assets involved in that game, okay, money just represents, it's just a very nebulous way it's the exemplification, it's the epitome of everything of value, right? So you're supposed to be able to measure labor costs and commodity costs, because those are the only things we're spending money on. It's either one or the other, labor or commodities, right? Because labor can never be considered a commodity because you can't purchase it. You can't own somebody, okay? You can't make somebody a slave. Okay, this is what the whole Civil War was about in America, right? Is that you can't do this. It's unethical. It's immoral. It's ungodly. It's unconstitutional. It's insufferable. It's unnerving. It's untenable, right? We're not going to stand for it, saith we the people, right? But yet, you know what's happened here over a long course of time? To use the analogy of, if you're going to eat some frogs, you got to cook them, so you put them in the pot, and you got to turn up the heat slow so they don't hop out. Then you got a big ordeal on your hands, right? You got a problem. Okay, and they had to cook us slow. For decade after decade, since the assassination of JFK, we had a money printing coup. It's as obvious as the day is long to me. I mean, if you ask that Latin term, cui bono, who benefits? Well, it's obvious. JFK was in the process of eliminating the Federal Reserve. Do you understand? Just to make this very clear. No ifs, ands, or buts. Don't tell me, these people had a motive too. These people had a motive. No. Let's who had the biggest motive. Okay? Who had the biggest motive? We didn't need them anymore, literally. He had already supplanted the Federal Reserve. Do you understand? He was circulating United States Treasury notes, silverback notes, and the American people were taken to him. Okay, the handwriting was written large on the wall for the Federal Reserve. Bye, we don't need you, you're irrelevant. Take your Federal Reserve notes and go, take a hike. That was the message, you understand? So just let's make this very clear. We don't have capitalism. Fundamentally, there's certain aspects about capitalism, like competition. Okay, and all JFK really did, at that point was introduce competition. Dollar competition, and that's how serious this whole thing is. We're talking about biblical level, satanic level power is imbued in the money supply. But the single greatest asset, as Adam Smith so eloquently pointed out, is your labor, the workers. Because after all, you could sit on a mountain of capital, money or fungible assets or anything else of value, okay, and it's not going to do you any good if you don't have workers, right? We can all agree on, the child can understand that. Nothing in society is going to get done. Nothing. So let's make that very clear. Every nation's single greatest asset that makes a nation wealthy is its willing workforce. But what they've done in America, to go back to the analogy of the frogs in the pot of water, they've turned the heat up very slow on us because they knew we were skittish at the assassination of JFK. To this day, Over 65% of the American people don't believe the official story. They think it's outlandish, preposterous, absurd, stupid, untrue. We know what happened. We need to let these people know. They need to be parented. For God's sake, how do they get away with this? Because the top politicians are cowards and sycophants to these people. Lapdogs for the Federal Reserve Bank. We don't need them. Hell, we can hire Kinkos to print money for us. Pay them a small fee. Do you understand? It's just a big scam. They've cheated the workers. And then you introduce the Labor Department, who has been obviously, deliberately remiss, decade after decade after decade after decade after decade. That's how they did this to us. We need a federal minimum wage. Why did we come up with a federal minimum wage in the first place? Ask yourselves that. Children, ask yourselves that. My friends, my foes, be honest. We know. Accept your empowerment and go out there and speak truth to power, and everybody else will listen. Bring them out of confusion, out of Babylon, to use a biblical term for confusion, out of ignorance. Empower them with the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That's all we can do. I mean, if we don't get to see justice in our lives, so be it. It doesn't mean we failed in the long run. You've got to have a scintilla of faith to believe God's will is going to be established upon earth. Okay, and it's going to look 180 degrees different from what it does now. Do you understand? You understand how these top money lovers that value money far more than conscience, integrity, honor, reputation, or soul, any of those things that you dumbbell, godly, decent, upright people, you're the righteous among us, those things that we value above all else. We won't do a whole slew of things, no matter how much money you offer me. I'm not compromising or selling my soul for anything. That belongs to God. I'm owned. I'm going to answer. I'm going to stand before God on Judgment Day. But these people don't care. Do you see how they've had an advantage over the righteous? They've been trampling the passive, the righteous under hooves for so long, the downtrodden, the dispossessed, the disenfranchised, the desperately poor, the destitute, the homeless. Do you understand? They've created this problem. And then they tell you, oh, it's because you're on drugs or alcohol, or you're stupid, or you're lazy. That's why. So we got to throw them some crumbs, set up a social welfare industry, and then blame them. Stereotype them. Finger them. Use them as scapegoats for our crimes. We want these waters muddied and bloodied. We want them more and more opaque. Let's stay on this trajectory. We've normalized slavery in America. You understand what they've done? The Labor Department. Give me one good reason. One. Nobody can give me one good reason why the Labor Department has been so utterly and profoundly and obviously deliberately remiss at giving adequate, nearly adequate, commensurate, equivalent, proportional cost of living adjustments to the federal minimum wage. Remember, decade after decade after decade after over 5 decades, well over 5 decades, since the assassination of JFK, the better part of 6 decades, well over half a century now, they've been doing this. And now they're trying to finger the minimum wage workers for inflation. Oh, it's because of those greedy, selfish minimum wage workers out there. That's why you've got inflation. That's why your hamburger went from $1 to $5. You understand why I'm upset and why you should be upset. Okay, if you accept your tyranny, then you deserve it. And you're going to keep getting more and more and more. It's not going to stop. You think any of us get to skate on this thing? We get to opt out? You get a waiver? We're all stuck in this thing together. And you can't be happy while your fellow human being, your brother, your sister, your child, your parent, suffers unnecessarily. 100% unnecessarily. It's invented. It's artificial. It's shoved down our throats from birth. this tax they euphemistically refer to. Well, it's just a cost of living. Of course you've got a cost of living. And of course it just goes up. I mean, inflation, duh, you understand inflation. It's supply and demand. Everybody wants this. They all want housing. Gee, wow. That's a surprise. Do you understand? They couldn't get away with this with luxury items, useless knickknacks and trinkets. Okay, which I would have no objection to. If they want to manipulate markets, go to it. Have fun with that. But they can't get away with it. See, they had to pick on commodities to inflate artificially through collusion of special interest groups working